By 1975, Warren Beatty was sitting comfortably atop the absolute peak of the new Hollywood mountain. Not only had he made himself the biggest movie star alive, he had completely redefined the role of an actor-producer. In fact, you could even say if there was a single progenitor of this entire movement in film, it was Beatty. By the midpoint of the decade, he had already played in various new Hollywood sandboxes, as violent anti-hero in Bonnie and Clyde, as a man caught in a shadowy conspiracy in The Parallax View. But ever since his ascension to megastardom, Beatty longed to experiment with the more personal filmmaking that also characterized the decade. Enter director Hal Ashby and screenwriter Robert Towne. These three titans of the era came together to create one of the new Hollywood's most singular achievements, the film Shampoo. The idea was conceived as a takeoff on a classic comedy of manners starring Beatty as George Roundy, a motorcycle-riding hairstylist with a clientele full of very, very satisfied ladies. Behind the scenes, the film's production was unfortunately characterized by Beatty the control freak pushing Ashby and Towne to the sidelines, but everyone involved wound up making a killing on Shampoo, which quickly became one of the 20 highest-grossing films of all time. The crowning touch was the movie's time period. Set against the backdrop of Nixon's election to the presidency in 1968, the character's myopic self-involvement becomes a stinging indictment of the slogan, "The personal is political." And upon the film's release in 1975, in the wake of Nixon's resignation, few electoral mistakes have probably ever seemed as fittingly cringeworthy. However, when watching the film today, its nostalgic aspect takes on an appropriate poignancy when considering the fact that Shampoo and 1975 also represent a moment when everything was about to change. The era of the blockbuster was just beginning, and Shampoo would quickly be knocked off any list connoting box office domination by things like Star Wars and Jaws. It's only appropriate that this elegiac tribute to late 60s delusion now exists as the ultimate movie they don't make anymore.
Welcome to Kale Your Idols, a new Hollywood podcast with your hosts,
Sam Ludwig
and Elena Gibson. This is a podcast about film. Primarily, we discuss movies, directors, actors, and writers known for their work during the new Hollywood era of studio filmmaking that began in 1967 with Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate, and pretty much ended in the early 80s with One from the Heart and Heaven's Gate. In this episode, we discuss the sex romp/political satire flick, Shampoo.
So, Elena, do you think this is the first movie we've covered on this show whose title invokes jizz?
Okay, well, we're going to have a discussion in a second about the fact that you think it evokes jizz, because that was not at all coming to my mind. But let's think. What are some other episodes we've done that might fit the bill?
The Graduate,
That one's kind of weak to me. I think we could do better. How about Dr. Dolittle, maybe?
That's definitely worse.
Oh, okay. No, this one's obvious. The Iceman Cometh. That's like explicitly about somebody jizzing.
But you think that is like more explicit about jizz than Shampoo is as the title of this movie?
Are you just saying it's about jizz because it's white and thick? I don't know. Like, I don't have access.
You need more than that?
As somebody who doesn't jizz myself, like as a non-penis haver, like I'm probably just like less likely to make the jizz connection. But do you really think this is like explicitly what the title is trying to evoke?
So it is explicitly jizz. Like, I think they picked the title because it sounds like jizz. Like, it's the one thing associated with being a hairstylist that also sounds sexual. Like, you're not going to call it like barber's chair. I guess you could call it barber's chair, actually. That could be good.
You think that Shampoo sounds sexual? I think it's like shampoo, like kind of fun and a little like lighthearted, and just like I feel like it evokes more like the fun sex rompiness of like shampoo, shampoo, like, I don't know, lightheartedness.
It's not meant to evoke that like to a person who's never seen the movie, I don't think, but you might go through a process of thinking, oh, Shampoo, like that's, I get it because he's a hairstylist, but then it's a weird, like there's no other movie that anybody's ever thought like maybe I should call this movie Shampoo, because it'd be a very weird title for anything, and it only just fits here, I think, because it's this combo of hairstylist and ladies' man. It's meant to be cheeky, I think, but there's obviously other things that the concept of Shampoo evokes, which we can go through. Like, I agree, you're right. It's like frothy and light, kind of like this partner swap comedy of manners thing that they're going for. It's also cleans you, I think, right? And maybe there's a political dimension to that, or a shallow, like they're just, they think that they're cleaning themselves, but it's really just putting on a new front or something.
You're certainly right that there are other aspects of being a hairdresser that could have been used as the title, but they deliberately chose Shampoo. So there must have been a lot of thought behind that decision.
They deliberately went with the goopiest thing that is associated with hairstylists.
I just always think that the choosing of a title is such a mysterious process. Like, I'm so bad at coming up with names for things. Like, anytime I participate in trivia, coming up with the name of the trivia team is my least favorite part. I do think there's an artistry to coming up with a title, and that artistry I don't have a single inclination towards. I admire people's ability to come up with a good title. I do think Shampoo is a good title. It's fun. It's memorable. It doesn't annoy me the way some titles do. So, jizz aside, I think it's a good title.
The first time I heard the title Shampoo was in another movie, which, like Shampoo, I think is probably very little seen these days, called Outside Providence. This was a dramedy created by the Farrelly brothers, like right after There's Something About Mary, a dramedy about this kid. It's set in the late 70s, and Alec Baldwin plays his gruff and somewhat shitty dad. And there's one point where Alec Baldwin is watching a trivia show, and the trivia question is like, this movie won Best Picture in 1976, and he confidently goes, Shampoo. And the answer is, of course, Cuckoo's Nest. So Shampoo was first introduced to me as like, what a silly sounding guess for the trivia question, this movie won Best Picture. Like, it's this Alec Baldwin character, it's like, he's supposed to have known this movie, but any non-idiot would know the answer to that question was not Shampoo. So it's just like it is a funny sounding word, I guess. But it's not, it doesn't sound like a title in a way. You know what I mean? Not quite title-y.
It's one of those titles where if you type it into Google, you have to make sure you put the word movie afterwards. Otherwise, you're just going to get a bunch of ads for shampoos to buy. I want to get back to something you said a second ago. I think you said that shampoo is pretty underseen. And that's interesting to me. Currently, it has like a 68% Rotten Tomato score, which is shocking to me how low that is. I just feel like this is the type of movie that most people would enjoy. And so it surprises me a lot that it is underseen. I guess all Hal Ashby movies are underseen to some degree, even the most famous ones like Harold and Maude. But why isn't this movie more popular? Because it's very entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, it's an evergreen concept. It's about a guy who's a ladies' man, but at the same time, he's in this sort of feminized context of being a hairdresser who spends all of his time with women instead of in boardrooms making business deals. Like his foil in the film, Lester, played by Jack Warden, who's like a businessy, Republican-y guy, as opposed to George's slightly feminized, semi-younger generation guy. Well, okay, so, but do you think that the movie is dated in ways that make it less seen now?
I would say one thing that is dated about this movie is the period piece aspect of it. This is, I think, one of those cases where the movie is a period piece, but it is not obvious to audiences nowadays that it's a period piece. Like, it was made in 1975, but it is about the year... What year was it again? 1968? I feel like you're giving me this look, and I know for you it's the most obvious year ever because you know what year this political election happened, but I'm just like so not plugged into political history, so sorry, okay? I don't fucking know the year that this movie's about at the top of my head.
Well, you know it's got to be at least an even year if you understand the way that political elections work in America. You know it's got to be probably on the 4 or the 2 or the 8. So you can easily guess this. You could probably tell if you know anything about the 60s that it's the late 60s. Some context clues might help some people, but you have this like it's like two opposing magnets. Like a date and a factoid comes at your face and you just like turn away and let it smack you with the side like a tennis ball that you don't want to hit back.
Look, I I do my civic duty and vote, and every time an election comes up, I look into the local politicians' policies and, I try to be informed as possible. But I'm just really...
presidential elections, not so much.
I don't feel like I need to do that much research to know which presidential candidate I'm going to be voting for. It's usually pretty obvious to me.
Well, I don't think I needed to do much research to find out what the year of the film we were watching was set in when it says it 80,000 times in the movie.
Okay, that's not the part of the movie at all that I latch onto. The political stuff. Okay, I was reading a lot of reviews about this movie, and something a lot of critics said is that the political satire is probably going over most people's heads. And I was like, yep, that's me. I'm one of those people. Like, they give me the date. It's very, very explicit that it's commenting on the election. Very explicit. And yet, it just immediately goes out of my head. I'm like, oh, I love this sex romp. This is so fun. Like, the satire of it, the political satire, it just whooshes by me. And I let it whoosh by me. Like, I'm aware that I'm kind of ignoring it, and I don't even care because I'm like, I hate politics. So it's this weird thing where, like, usually I do find myself very engaged with, I don't know, perhaps the more highbrow aspect of a film in terms of the commentary it's trying to make. Like, I usually do engage with that, and I'm usually not the type of person who just wants to be entertained by a movie. But Shampoo, because it's engaging with political satire, I'm just gonna latch onto the sex romp stuff more.
Well, which of course, if you said this to any sage-like person who does understand the film, they would sort of nod their head and say, yes, and that's exactly the point. Because this movie is about a bunch of people who are much more concerned with their own personal sex romp lives than they are with the political implications of the election that's happening on that day. This actually makes me think of something. Well, so first of all, there's the question of the period piece-ness of something getting lost to time as the time when the movie came out becomes further and further in the past. Like, I think about this with The Music Man all the time. So, like, The Music Man came out in 1957, and it's about the turn of the 20th century. And the whole character of Harold Hill, there's all of these jokes that are about how much he's playing on the extreme prudishness of these early 20th century Iowans. Like, he's freaking them out by talking about, like, near beer and fake cigarettes. But this aspect of the humor of the show is, I think, lost to audiences now. Like, they don't understand that it was being ironic when it came out in the 50s about a hokier time in its own mind. Audiences just think I'm watching an old-timey thing.
The hair of the characters in Shampoo looks ridiculous. George, the main character's hair, is all fluffy and crazy looking. The women's hair looks crazy looking. And as I was watching, I'm like, why does their hair look so bad? And then I was thinking it's probably trying to make fun of 60s hairstyles because it is a period piece and it's set 7 years later. They're looking back and laughing at how the hair used to be. But I think modern audiences watching that are not going to be aware of the period piece-ness of it, and they're just going to think the hair looks stupid. And they're not going to realize that's part of the point.
So it's like the movie opens, it says November 4th, 1968. They show Nixon on the TV a lot, and that doesn't evoke to you that this is all set on an election day. Like, forget about the historical significance.
No, again, as I said, obviously it tells you, pay attention to the fact that it's set on election night. But my brain is like, I don't want to.
What do you come away from thinking about when you're watching this movie?
It's just kind of delightful and fun. And I love the humanness aspect of it where, the political satire of it, it's criticizing the characters for not caring more about the election. But I think if the characters were approached as annoying and super flighty, like, there's a way that these characters could be approached that would make this movie way less pleasant to watch because you wouldn't like the characters. But the way that Hal Ashby presents them through his direction and the way the screenplay has the characters act, it's just very endearing. Even though you think you would find the characters annoying, I find them weirdly likable.
Well, they're all sort of innocents, and this stems from George, but it extends even to Lester. All of the characters, they have varying degrees of sympatheticness, but they're all lying to themselves about something or other. This is why they all need beards at the party, because they can't be honest about what they really want in their personal life. And by the way, this also really reminded me of Boogie Nights, as far as like the innocence of the porn stars and that. They both say like, I'm a star. They both have like, I think this movie like has a real thing in common with Boogie Nights, and sort of trying to, the sexual aspects of their behavior, even though they're deceptive, are all sort of very playful and innocent. If there's an overt political message to the content of the film, it's like not every Don Juan is a misogynist.
I definitely see the connection to Boogie Nights and also to Licorice Pizza, another Paul Thomas Anderson. He's probably is very influenced by this movie, now that you point that out. But yeah, the character of George, who's the main character played by Warren Beatty, hairdresser who sleeps with a bunch of women, you're totally right that there's an innocence to him. He should be a character that you find skeevy or an asshole, but he just seems like he's at the mercy of the women that he's sleeping with. Like, he's a bit of a pushover. He seems always like he's at his wit's end when interacting with all the women. Yes, he's sleeping with all of them, but it's like, it's a hard job, you know, and he's good on him for taking on this job of trying to make all these women happy. Pauline Kael addresses this in her long review of Shampoo. She says that the character of George has the pagan purity of an adolescence, and that he's the only one of the characters who isn't completely selfish, because the other characters know how to use people. She says, making love to a beautiful woman is an aesthetic thing with him, and making her look beautiful is an act of love to him. He's almost a sexual saint. So yeah, I totally agree that he's weirdly presented as a very innocent character. And I know Hal Ashby struggled with making a movie where he felt like he didn't initially like the characters in the screenplay. He said, they're not people I spent time with, but they're people I've looked at and felt badly for. So I spent a lot of time being very kind to those people. The other way is easy. To make fun of people is easy. Life isn't that easy. And I just really feel that Hal Ashby touched behind how sympathetic George is. I think Ashby is really resistant to making fun of his characters or looking down on them.
Well, I think the whole political aspect was Ashby's touch. Like, I think he added that as a kind of very light satirical cast on these characters. This movie is the Ashby masterpiece that is not really an Ashby movie in a lot of people's eyes. He was clearly chosen by Beatty at this point in his career as an interesting director, but somebody who was known for being very laid back and easily able to manipulate. Ashby, I think, felt a little jilted by, I don't think he felt like he got paid enough money, and of course everybody's looking at this as not his movie, but I really do see this movie, and it's such an Ashby movie. It is my favorite of his 7 quote-unquote masterpieces that he made in the 70s, which we can go through really quick again just to sort of refresh you. The Landlord, Harold and Maude, The Last Detail, Shampoo, Bound for Glory, Coming Home, and Being There. And Shampoo is really the midpoint where that it changed the whole trajectory of Ashby's career. And in my opinion, his 70s output is incomplete without this film.
Yeah, we have talked a lot about Ashby previously on the podcast. We have a whole episode on him. So if you're more interested in Ashby, definitely check that one out. But as we discussed in that episode, this concept of having movies taken away from him, having other people be considered the more primary drivers of the film, that's something that commonly happens to Ashby. Like in Coming Home, a lot of people considered it more of a Jane Fonda film rather than a Hal Ashby film. Yeah, in this case, as you said, people view this movie as being taken away from him, and that Warren Beatty was the main person behind the film. He was the producer, he was the co-screenwriter, and of course the lead actor. And Beatty has such a force of personality that he just bowls his way through any situation and makes sure that he always gets his way. And as a result, Ashby apparently had a really terrible time on set. It was Warren Beatty and screenwriter Robert Towne at each other's throats on set, and then Ashby would just be sitting on the side, miserable. But I totally agree that I do think you can see his fingerprints through the humanity of the characters, and as you said, the political satire. Because Warren Beatty, this movie was released less than a year after Nixon resigned because of Watergate, but the filming of the movie wrapped a few months before Nixon resigned, and Warren Beatty said he didn't plan on this movie coming out and timing it right during all of this Nixon controversy. But Ashby, on the other hand, said he did plan it that way. And Ashby has always had Nixon criticisms in his other movies, like The Landlord and Harold and Maude and The Last Detail. So it clearly is something that Ashby cares about.
They knew they were going to do 1968 election, I think even before the Watergate proceedings started, right? Or had the proceedings already began? The thing is that I kind of think that in Ashby's mind and all of the creators' mind when they're doing this, it's just kind of like looking back at the election of this asshole Nixon. And so it's funny because Nixon's ultimate resignation and disgrace because of Watergate leads to a kind of larger indictment. Like, it could have just been this circle jerky thing where it's like these liberal guys being like, look at, we elected this Republican to the presidency like 7 years ago. How stupid was that? But when it's literally Nixon, the one president who has actually resigned and been slightly forced out because of political pressure on his own side, at this point, literally everyone agrees that Nixon's a piece of shit. It sort of opens up the social commentary to be not just political points scoring. It feels like it sort of brings everybody together under this one banner of like, we all knew this was a mistake, right?
Right, like maybe in Ashby's other films, he's criticizing Nixon, but in this film, he's more criticizing all the other characters for not caring more about the election as it's happening. We watch them on election day, and they're not voting. They're dealing with their personal troubles.
George finds time to sleep with at least 4 different women in less than 24 hours, and he does not find the time to go to a voting booth.
It's amazing to me that he still has a job at this point. He's portrayed as like a really good hairdresser and that everybody loves him and respects his work. Yet when you see him at the salon, he's just only there for like 2 minutes before he leaves to go fuck some woman in her place. He always does her hair first. Like, he does truly care about women's hair and giving them a really good look, but it's so funny seeing the way he spends his time. So yeah, he doesn't even do his job at the salon, which is the thing that he does care about, let alone go vote.
So, okay, look, I'll be 100% honest, and kill me if you want, or, drag me, I don't care. I love this movie, and a big part of it is not just that it's set on my birthday, November 4th. I relate to this character, okay? This position of being somebody who at times, like, I'm polyamorous, and there's been times when I've been involved with multiple women to varying degrees, and you're looked at as being incredibly selfish by people. But this movie really gets that a lot of your time then is spent feeling very distracted and like you're going and having to listen to this person's problems and understand this person's life to the best of your ability. And then you have this other interaction with another person and everybody's feeling sort of dissatisfied by you. But I've often just felt like if people could just see like my day-to-day life, it would really explain a lot.
The joke is that a polyamorous person is talking to their non-polyamorous friend and was like, oh, I was up so late last night. And the friend was like, oh, because you're having a lot of sex because you're polyamorous, right? And the other person's like, no, I was talking all night trying to like process.
We call it processing.
Just talking through the relationship, making sure everybody's doing okay and checking in and strengthening those communication skills. And so it is funny that there is a lot of judgment towards people who have a lot of sexual partners, that it's looked upon as such a negative thing. But you're right that this movie does capture an aspect of that's very real, that like having a lot of sexual partners does often involve having to listen to a lot of different people's problems and navigating that and trying to make all of your partners happy when you only have so much time in your day, which is why I personally, I only do like 2 relationships at a time as a polyamorous person, because I just don't have time in my day for more than that. But enough of our polyamory propaganda.
Do you think this movie is propagandistic about its views on sexuality?
I think it's very even. Like, I think that Warren Beatty is really putting himself in a sympathetic light, but not so sympathetic that he's not open to criticism. So I actually think it's kind of admirable the way that Warren Beatty presents himself. It's a flattering character for sure, but open to criticism.
But you're not really getting any sympathetic portrayals of anybody like settling down into a normal life that doesn't seem at least opportunistic, right? Like Jackie, the character played by Julie Christie, perhaps the most famous ex-girlfriend of Warren Beatty. And the movie's peppered with women that he slept with in a deliberate effort to put these well-known romances in the mind of the audience.
Like, Warren Beatty had relationships with Julie Christie, who played Jackie, and Goldie Hawn, who played Jill, and...
He probably fucked Lee Grant, too. Who knows? I don't know. Actually, I think she thought he was an asshole. So.
She had a very slight romance with him on set, where at first she almost quit because of him, because she was so annoyed, but then they resolved it, and she had this story that she was in her hotel room talking with her friend. It was the type of friend that would just talk on and on and on without coming up for a breath. And Warren Beatty came to her hotel room while she was on the phone and started kissing her. And they made out, and then Warren Beatty left, and she was still on the phone with her friend the whole time, and the friend didn't even notice. So I think she had a little bit of a fling, but I think it was just like a passionate kiss from her account of the story. Warren Beatty just he got around. I feel like he just felt like he had a gift to share with the world, and he wanted to share it one woman at a time. Peter Biskin wrote a biography about him where he gave an outrageous number in terms of the number of women Warren Beatty slept with.
Right, it was like 12,000 or something like that.
I know Warren Beatty was like, no, I could not possibly have slept with that many women. But that's just crazy that is even an attempted estimate.
The numbers don't add up. Sorry, before I get to this next point, I do want to go back and finish up what I was trying to say about the movie's evangelism of different lifestyles. I don't really think this movie presents a particularly good portrait of any monogamous people who've settled down in a marriage. Like, it's treated as mercenary when Jackie wants to settle down with Lester, and that's presumably the same reason that Felicia got with Lester too.
To me, though, that didn't read as an indictment of relationships and marriage. It felt like more of a criticism of LA culture. Like, it felt so LA, and it felt like it wasn't really trying to apply that same behavior towards the general public, and it was more that the common person thinks it's fun to watch all of the crazy antics of the rich and famous who just lead wild lives because they can.
But again, the movie's all about honesty. Where we find George at the end, he is on a literal mountaintop, and it's not like I think he's achieved perfect enlightenment, but it does evoke a kind of all-seeingness or omnipotence that George has from this vantage point. He's the ending of the movie, classic New Hollywood. He doesn't get the girl. She runs away from him, runs into the arms of Jack Warden, the benevolent and yet undoubtedly Republican and probably abhorrent in other ways businessman, Lester. And Warren Beatty is on top of the mountain, and he can see all of Beverly Hills, and he can see the girl that got away, and he can see everything, and he's weeping. I don't think that the movie is necessarily trying to say anything about these characters being avatars for a universality of experience, but I do think that Beatty is perhaps being shown to be being the most honest with himself by the end of the movie, and the other characters are still a little bit trapped in their own delusions. And again, I'm not saying that this makes George Beatty's characters smart or capable now of finally achieving his dreams and going after the right thing, but I do think that he has been taught a lesson about human nature that he feels a little outside of or exempt from because he is never going to be a part of that society. He's always going to be a little outside of it, and I don't know.
I think that this is one of the great aspects about this film is it's the type of film that can have multiple readings, and all of those readings have value, because when I watch the ending and when I see George decide that Jackie is actually the woman he truly loves and he wants to settle down with her, and he finally found a relationship he's willing to commit to, as an audience member, I feel like I think to myself, yeah, you think that now, but you're going to be dissatisfied with this relationship at some point, and you're not actually truly going to be able to commit to this, and you just think you want this because you sense that she's getting away, and it's just one of those classic cases of like suddenly really wanting the thing that you can't have. That's how it feels a little bit to me. And in terms of whether or not he learns a lesson at the end, I know that Robert Towne, the screenwriter, and Warren Beatty, they both wanted an epilogue to the film, but they couldn't agree on what the epilogue was. But both of them, their epilogue would have involved the characters continuing their lives making the same mistakes, not learning enough to change their behavior. But Hal Ashby didn't like that, and he liked ending it on the mountaintop where you're not sure what's going to happen. Like, you're not sure if George is going to change his behavior, if he did learn a lesson or not, or if he just felt like he did in that moment. And that's one of the great things about the film is, despite something's being super obvious, it still has a light touch and an ambiguous touch.
Maybe Beatty at the end, weeping on the mountaintop. Maybe he's crying because he just made a flailing gesture towards a random woman that he's having a passing fancy is a deeper relationship. And, he's just crying at his own inadequacy. Maybe he's crying because he's seeing the one that got away. Because they are presented as having a slightly different relationship than George has to the other women. He's always able to be a little bit more honest with her because they are exes. And so they already have that relationship where it's like, we both know each other at our worst. And they're seeing each other at their worst in a way on this fateful day. And so I do think that there is meant to be something that Beatty is sensing in Jackie, Julie Christie's character, in being like, no, this person does really know me. But regardless, whatever interpretation you want to have about the ending, there's no question that you're watching a man weeping on top of a mountain in 1968, and something is meant to have been lost there, right? Like the movie has a deep sense of like a sweetly nostalgic look back at like a feeling of loss or a feeling of something, like the election of Nixon in 1968, something irrevocable that, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah. So this calls to mind something, Sam, that you always talk about and that I would have no awareness of if it weren't for you, but that the end of the 60s are often considered sort of like a loss of innocence time because the 60s were so revolutionary. People thought anything was possible. Real change was happening. You can live your life outside the constraints of normal society, but then all of these assassinations happened and the Manson murders happened, and it just brought this darkness, and it kind of is the beginning of the boomerang back to a more conservative era. And
it sounded like you said boomerang.
Boomerang. No.
It's the beginning of the great boomerang, which is true. So do you think this is a good time to get into the specifics of exactly which particular presidential election date this movie is set?
You're saying, okay,
You still can't even listen to me when I make a very clear statement like that, just because it has a date in it.
This is going to be all Sam now, explaining to us the relevance of the 1968 election, which was between Nixon and somebody else. Sam, take it away. Explain to me the relevance of this political election.
It was Nixon versus Humphreys, who was the vice president of Lyndon Johnson. Okay, so just trying to do this very quickly and as succinctly as I can, because this is honestly one of the most action-packed and fraught elections. It is probably the craziest election in American history, and the second most crazy might be this most recent one that we had, which is also very parallel in a lot of ways, as you'll hear, if you don't already know. But so, okay, it's 1968. Lyndon Johnson is president. He became president after John Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. Johnson finishes out that Kennedy term into 1964, and then easily wins re-election when it's like literally you're going to vote out the guy who succeeded John Kennedy, who was just murdered last year, politically invincible. And Johnson used a lot of this capital that he had to do really wonderful, rather leftist things in the context of the American presidency, the Great Society. He passed some he passed some very important civil rights legislation. He was instrumental in the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act and yada, yada, yada. Johnson should have been the darling of the American left, but unfortunately his Achilles heel was feeling, for whatever reason, that it was necessary for the U.S. to become more involved in the Vietnam War, and Johnson becomes increasingly sort of yoked to this stupid policy. By early 1968, he is challenged. The sitting president is challenged in a primary by McCarthy, a Democratic senator or whatever. I don't remember what he was. But and he beats Johnson. And so then Johnson, in a very Biden-like move, is then forced to say, okay, I guess I'm not going to run for presidency again. And so he bows out of the race, which then leaves it wide open. And so you have McCarthy, who is presenting himself as an anti-war candidate, Humphreys, Johnson's VP, who obviously can't present himself as an anti-war candidate because he's a fucking vice president of the guy who started the war, and RFK, John Kennedy's younger brother. And Kennedy seems like the front runner in the Democratic primary. He wins the California primary, a major race. He is triumphant at the celebration for him winning the party. That evening, he is assassinated on television. It's absolutely crazy. At this point, the Democrats are in shambles. The guy who just won the California primary and is by far the most famous candidate just got killed. This is also a month after the killing of Martin Luther King. And so then this allows Nixon, who 8 years previously had already lost the presidency to RFK's brother, John Kennedy. Nixon rebrands as the friendlier, nicer Nixon. He goes on the TV show Laugh-In and famously says, "Sock it to me." Laugh-In, by the way, a show which had Goldie Hawn on it. I'm sure that was part of the ironic casting of her in this movie. Nixon then also presents a very racist campaign where he's talking about law and order all the time, because there's also like riots at the Democratic convention that we didn't even get into. Go see the wonderful film The Trial of Chicago 7 if you want to get more into that. And I'm being sarcastic. Nixon, he appeals to the so-called silent majority of Americans who are sick of all this late 60s anti-America hippie bullshit, and he squeaks to a narrow victory that many people could say would have been prevented if members of the American left had gotten off their asses and maybe shown out to vote a little bit more in this election instead of doing a bunch of women's hair and riding around on your motorcycle without a helmet on, so to speak.
It's amazing to me that you didn't need notes or anything to recount all of that. That's just like in your brain. You just know all those facts about what happened around that time. And a lot of those things I could tell were very exciting and crazy and terrible, but sorry, it's just so hard for my eyes not to glaze over the second somebody starts recounting political history to me.
Do you think that you could properly recount the major events of the most recent election?
I could list some things out of order. But I don't like holding space for those things in my brain. I find it all very unpleasant to think about. I don't want to give it more space than I need to. But I'm certainly more aware of what is currently happening and what literally just happened than history. It is like the historical aspect that makes it particularly unpalatable to my brain.
I couldn't do that with every election in the history of America. 1968 is an incredibly important year. There is an entire documentary just on this year. This is the darkest year of the 60s for a lot of people. This is all the assassination attempts, riots in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention. Is this when the Manson murders happened, or is that next year? The Manson murders were in 1969, which also makes sense because this movie, I would say, evokes Manson in a lot of very subtle ways. In the first scene, Goldie Hawn is talking about she's hearing screaming echoing through the canyon, and she's afraid, and Beatty's just very what are you afraid about? And one of the bases for the character of George was considered to be Jay Sebring, who was one of the murder victims in the Tate LaBianca murders by the Mansons. He was played by Emile Hirsch in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So, it's all kind of in the mix there. And Manson is the perfect figure to represent this curdling of free love, hippies, drug culture, whatever, solipsism.
Yeah. There is a weird sense of doom that happens towards the other end of the film. Randomly, the main character George's boss of the salon, the owner of the salon, you find out his son just died in a car accident, and everybody's really sad about it and upset, obviously, because that's a tragic thing to happen. But it is so disconnected from the entire plot. So having that death suddenly crop up in the film is a reminder, although this film has been weirdly gentle in terms of its stakes, and you think nothing really bad is going to happen to any of the characters, bad things do happen in society. And then later when you're watching George chase after Jackie on his motorcycle when she's in a car and they're zipping around on these mountain LA roads, I found myself very anxious about if they were getting into a car accident or not, because the movie had brought to the table the possibility of death. And so I definitely think that hint of death at the end is probably related to the Manson murders.
I mean, we can get into the car accident, and in my opinion, it being both, yes, obviously like a thing to put in your mind to make you sort of scared towards the end because George is acting a little crazy. It's a harbinger of doom. But I do also think that the role of randomness and coincidence is very interwoven into a lot of the plot mechanics of Shampoo in a way that at the beginning of the movie, I was like, this is a really weird amount of very thin connections between these characters, and like they're all showing up at each other's house all the time. A lot of random stuff happens, but at first, I was thinking about it and I was like, oh, this is just kind of a weirdly and refreshingly in some ways listless screenplay. There's not a lot of cause and effect. A lot of the movie is just about people getting ready to go to these parties, and then they go to the parties and they kind of interact with other people. It's not like anybody does something and then that leads to another thing. It's just kind of like you have this set of characters. Let's have these two interact. Now let's have these two interact. Beatty goes to get a bank loan, and, within half an hour, he's denied it. And then like an hour later, he's talking to Lester, this man he's never met, who he's sleeping with his daughter and his wife and his mistress, and he's attempting to get a loan from this. It's all very silly. Of course, there's the farce aspect to this, because this is all kind of a classic bedroom farce setup. But then as the movie went along, I really was starting to think that there was something about the nature of life and randomness. Like the moment when Lester uncovers Jackie and George sleeping together, the fridge just sort of magically opened. Like he's watching two people fuck in shadow, and then the fridge just opens on its own to reveal them in a gorgeously lit shot. By the way, there's a lot of, in my opinion, wonderful Ashby lighting effects in this movie.
Yeah, that's really interesting because that's not something I picked up on at all, is the coincidences. In fact, Pauline Kael had something in her review that resonated with me that's basically saying the opposite, is that in a lot of these sex farces, there's a lot of coincidences of characters bumping into each other, but this movie feels different because the plot isn't quite as arbitrary, where when the characters show up at the same events, it's often because they know that everybody else is going to be there. Like they know that they're going to run into their husband's mistress or whatever, and they go on purpose because they love the drama. So the fridge door thing is certainly an example of random coincidence and chance, and same with the death of the salon owner's son. But there are other aspects about the film that almost resist that coincidence feeling, just because of characters love to stir up trouble and the LA-ness of it all. Like the fact that they all know each other feels like it's a commentary on the incestuousness of LA culture.
But it just does kind of feel a little bit weird that George, at the beginning of this day, doesn't seem to quite realize all the interconnections between these different people that he had. Like, his girlfriend is Jill, played by Goldie Hawn, who is, I guess, best friends with Jackie, his ex, who he seemingly hasn't seen in years. He then runs into Jackie that day. Jackie is sleeping with Lester, whose wife George already slept with that day. Like, it's just, like, it's a little unbelievable. First, obviously, it's unbelievable that all of these different things would happen in this single day. I'm shying away from criticizing the movie because, like, all of these things that make the screenplay so weird, I really like. And in fact, I would say are some of the most new Hollywood aspects of the movie, like how non-propulsive the plot is, how passive of a protagonist George is, and just kind of the fact that it's a movie that is just like, well, let's just have a scene where these two characters talk, and like then we can have this other character just kind of come by.
Certainly you're right that if you dive into it, there are lots of aspects about it that are contrived. George not realizing the Jill and Jackie friendship. I'm a little hand-wavy about that type of thing. Like, it's a screenplay. That's just how you write movies. You're going to try and make all the exciting things that can happen in a person's life happen on the same day or within a short period of time, just because that makes for a more interesting movie. I'll certainly give you that.
But it's like you could do a fix where, and maybe, and it's been a couple days since I've seen the movie, but like I feel like George sees Jackie again before he is engaged with Lester in a potential business deal. The sillier, plottier version of it would be George is assumed to be gay by Lester, and Lester is just like, could you be a beard for my girlfriend? Then George goes to the door and he then realizes that's Jackie. That's not how this movie does it.
Yeah, sure, they could have done it differently, but I also don't think there's a problem with the way they currently did it. Like, I don't think that there's things that need to be fixed.
I'm saying I like it more, to be clear.
You're totally right that it is not that propulsive, which is cool. Like the stakes of the movie, I think, are really interesting because they've set up that George wants to open his own salon and he wants a loan. And so that's one of the motivations for him to try and agree to what Lester, the businessman, wants of him. Like he agrees to be the beard for Lester because he does want the loan. But in other movies, the stakes would be it's set up in such a way that George would care so much about getting this loan that he would be willing to do anything to get it. That's not how this film is. Like George considers saying no, and he basically says something to Jackie insinuating that he feels like it's a little bit like whoring yourself out to pretend to be this beard for businessman Lester just so that he can get the loan. And he doesn't like that. Like that goes against his sensibilities. He does have principles, but he's eventually gets convinced by Jackie to do it. Yeah, it just makes it really interesting stakes because you know that George is willing to walk away from this at any point. You don't get the sense that he feels really pressured to do anything to please Lester. And he's sleeping with all these women who would be really mad if they each found out about each other. But you're also not super worried about what would happen if they do find out. And then they do find out and everything's okay. Like they find out and at one point you think Lester's going to come over and beat the crap out of George. But that doesn't happen. In fact, instead they just have a really interesting and honest conversation with each other where they relate to one another. And it really reminded me of the conversation that happens in Coming Home when two romantic rivals confront each other. And again, you think that maybe one of them is going to be violent with the other, but instead they just have a conversation. So that feels like a very Ashby thing to me. But yeah, not the way a typical movie is. And it's not as propulsive, as you mentioned, as a typical movie. Yet it's still very pleasant to sit in.
These are the aspects that elevate the movie. And yet also maybe this is why it has such a weirdly low audience score too, because the movie is broad but also subtle at the same time. As far as an example of its broadness, there's a shot where, Lester is talking, he's like, he's a nice guy, too bad he's probably gay. And then it cuts to a shot of George shampooing a girl's hair with her head pressed right up against his crotch. And it's like, Beatty's crotch, by the way, it's padded like it's a Build-A-Bear in this movie. There's some very sort of cartoonish touches, but the movie's downbeat nature makes it more of a character study and less of a farce. And I love that about the screenplay. And there's touches that we could ascribe to Beatty or Ashby or Robert Towne. Unfortunately, the sad thing is it really feels like Beatty's hands were in so many different aspects of the making of the film that almost anything that you see where you're like, oh, that music choice, that's such an Ashby music choice. And then you read, Beatty was actually also kind of up his ass about the music and he wanted a lot more stuff and Beatty made him only have this and have the Paul Simon soundtrack replace a lot of Ashby's needle drop choices. And then even stuff like the editing where you're like, oh, this is such great Ashby frenetic editing. And it's like, well, Beatty even apparently got in the editing room too. It's like, fuck, what? I want to give credit to Robert Towne and Warren Beatty, but he was just there to suck it all up. Just like all the ladies.
Oh, you mean you wanted to give credit to Robert Towne and Hal Ashby, but Beatty sucked it up?
Is that what I...
You said credit to Robert Towne and Warren Beatty, but I knew what you meant. Yeah, it's constantly this debate of like how much of this movie is Ashby's. I do still feel like I could feel Ashby's touch, but certainly Warren Beatty had his fingers all up in it. Like he dictated a lot of the hiring choices in terms of the cast and crew. Like the cinematography is by Laszlo Kovacs, who's a great cinematographer. Ashby had wanted Haskell Wexler, who's also a great cinematographer, but Beatty didn't like working with Wexler, so he imposed his demands on him. Although, Beatty was the producer, and I guess that is what producers do. It's hard to criticize him too much for doing his role as a producer,
No, and the movie, and he wrote it, and he stars in it, and it's like about him. You know what I mean? Like they all agreed, like you are this guy. We're attempting to give the Warren Beatty experience plus hairdresser in movie form. But stuff like, sorry to just keep litigating the Ashby versus Beatty feud even long after Ashby's dead, but so Ashby did choose Jack Warden, But then Warren Beatty uses Jack Warden in like every movie that he ever directs. So he's just like, no, Jack Warden's mine.
I want to take a sec to, since we're litigating roles here, talk about the screenplay, because it was co-written by Warren Beatty and Robert Towne. And Robert Towne, if you're not familiar, is one of the most famous New Hollywood screenwriters of all time. When Shampoo came out, the screenplay got a nomination for Best Screenplay, and it was Robert Towne's third nomination in a row. He got nominated for The Last Detail in 1973, for Chinatown in 1974, and then for Shampoo in 1975. That's an incredible run. Like, he is considered a great screenwriter. But it's a shared credit, and according to Peter Biskin in his book Easy Riders Raging Bulls, Robert Towne let Warren Beatty have a screenwriting credit even though he didn't really write any of it, and that Warren Beatty, according to Robert Towne, played the role more as an editor. When asked why Robert Towne let Beatty share the credit, Towne said, "Oh, you know Warren. Unless you do stuff like that, you're not going to get the other stuff you can from Warren." I feel like Robert Towne is the type of person who is perfectly willing to take a little too much credit for things, and he's a little bit up his own ass about his own work and thinks his own contributions are the greatest ever. So I am hesitant to think that Warren Beatty was not involved. Robert Towne also describes this like 10-day intensive writing workshop, basically, that Beatty and Towne and Ashby all did together, where Beatty and Towne would be yelling at each other and shouting like, "You cunt, like that's more cunt stuff, stop being a fucking cunt," and things like that. I guess they love the word cunt. But they had a really volatile relationship. They were close collaborators, but it was a bit of a frenemies situation between Towne and Beatty, and Ashby was there just to kind of mediate it. But like, if you're describing that 10-day intensive where they're talking about the screenplay to that level that they get into those arguments, I'm sorry, but Warren Beatty must have been contributing to the writing. I just feel like Robert Towne is being a little too greedy with the credits.
Yeah, Beatty described that 10-day period as the most creative 10 days of his life. The thing that you have to understand about Robert Towne at this very moment, though, is like, I don't really know if... So Robert Towne at this time is occupying a position that I don't know if there's another example of in the history of screenwriting power. I guess you could say Aaron Sorkin, what's his name? Donald Trumbo would be another person who you could argue had a certain amount of power, although, you know, he had it taken away from him, but then found a way to work around. But anyways, William Goldman would be another example. Obviously, like, he's the other big screenwriter that people think of this era. But William Goldman's a little bit more, I think, of a middle-of-the-road movie writer, typically. His work is brilliant, and I think he's generally a much more impressive screenwriter than Robert Towne is. But Towne at this moment, when you got Last Detail, Chinatown, and Shampoo, bam, 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 these are all really unusual films. Structurally, as far as the way that they're pulling genres apart, this is a takeoff on a comedy of manners, a partner-swapping comedy. Chinatown's obviously an examination of film noir tropes. The Last Detail, I don't know if, you could really think of that as a genre thing, but it's certainly trying to present the military in a new light. I guess it's kind of a military movie in a way. And so I just don't know if there's any other example of a writer who was on such a peak and stayed there for this many projects in a row. The ambition of his work, he wants to write great movies and write unique characters, but he's also just making people kind of re-examine what they even want from these movies and being rewarded by it. Chinatown won Best Screenplay, nominated for Screenplay all these 3 years. Shampoo, which is, you could say, is a kind of an esoteric movie, was a huge hit. So Towne is somebody who, I think, in the wake of his recent death, R.I.P., a lot of people were sort of taking the stance that, well, his script for Chinatown's great, but maybe he's a little overrated as a writer. And I see that argument, but I think just thinking about where he's at in the middle 70s as far as being a true artisan of strange writing, and how successful he was at that, I can see why somebody might get a inflated opinion of their own abilities.
That's so funny. I'm pretty sure you wrote a caption for one of my social posts about Robert Towne that basically agreed with everybody saying maybe he's a little overhyped just because of the Chinatown script. So.
Yeah, but I'm amending it now, and I'm saying, thinking about Shampoo in the context of this run that Robert Towne's on, it's making me examine just what a formal experimenter he was. When you look at the work like this, as far as the ambition, I do think that Towne does deserve his flowers, and maybe I shouldn't be shitting as much on this dead man as I have been.
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly an impressive run of movies, as you said, for reasons other than just being really great screenplays. Like, you're right that it does seem like he was really experimenting with what genre of film he was working in at the time. I'll still find him annoying, though, when I hear direct quotes from him talking about how great he is and stuff. But he is worthy of praise, of course. Given how much Warren Beatty and Hal Ashby struggled for power over this film, I was kind of surprised to read some of the things that Beatty said about Ashby after the movie was over, and which I'll share now. But I guess it makes sense now thinking about the fact that, like, Ashby struggled for power. Beatty did not struggle for power. Beatty just took the power. And that's just the way he conducted his life in all aspects, I imagine. But at the end of the filming, Beatty spoke really fondly about Ashby and said, I would call him a strong director. He wanted to put actors on the screen, not put himself on the screen. He had a great sense of humor, had great subtlety, and got the best out of people. So it's just really interesting that you'll hear about Beatty, like, wrenching power away from people, but he still really respects them and respects their work. But I imagine just if you have, like, a really strong personality, you're just that way to everybody. Like,
he just thinks he's right. Like, and he knows he's right.
I think something similar kind of happens to you sometimes, Sam, where not at all in the same way, but, like, you are so animated sometimes when you're having conversations that sometimes people are intimidated by it and think that you're getting, like, angry at them or whatever, but really you're just really engaging with the conversation, and people mistake it to mean that you don't like the things they're saying.
Or that I'm sure of what I think at all, and that I'm not just completely willing to walk back almost anything that I ever say and say, oh, maybe I guess I was stupid.
You want to be proven wrong. Like, you want people to make great points, and when they do, you're like, that was a great point. You're right. I think you're right about that, you know? And I bet Beatty is somewhat similar in a different sort of way, where he has this strong personality, but that doesn't mean he's closed off to other people's skills and talents and strengths.
Yes, let's continue to compare me to the favorable attributes of Warren Beatty. This sounds like a fun podcast. But just thinking about where Warren Beatty is at, so he's so powerful, and he's already worked with Robert Altman on McCabe and Mrs. Miller, which Julie Christie was also in. Altman and Ashby have some similarities. You know, they're both people who I think let a lot of the actors do what they want, and they create a certain kind of environment on set where magic can happen every once in a while, but they're not meticulous craftspeople getting into the weeds, trying to tell people, like, no, this is more like what you're thinking in this performance. But Altman is a huge, forceful personality, much more so famously than Hal Ashby. And the experience of McCabe and Mrs. Miller involved, basically by everybody's admission, Robert Altman fucking up the sound for the first half hour of this movie, and then him and the critical community deciding, oh, you know what, that's art. Like, this is what an Altman picture is going to be. It's an ambiance thing. You don't need to hear what's going on in the first half hour of the movie. Meanwhile, Warren Beatty is the star of this movie, watching people watch it, and he's like, these people don't know what the fuck is going on in the first 30 minutes of this movie, which is supposed to be like me teaming up with Robert Altman. So, you know, I can imagine that being a particularly maddening thing where you're dealing with this brilliant artist who seems so obviously wrong and trying to cover their own ass, and you, Warren Beatty, are simply saying, let's just fix the fucking sound, you know? So I think that puts him in an interesting position as far as needing to have somebody that he can at least have the final word with if something like that crops up. You know what I mean? Like, I really think that was probably playing on his particular psychology, and probably that was an early film for him, and I think that probably made a big difference in the way that he approached directors of his career.
I could imagine that being a very influential experience to have when it comes to moving forward and how to prevent that from happening. He definitely knew when he was working with Ashby that he'd be able to have final say in a lot of things. I don't think Ashby was the type to say, like, oh, that mistake was actually good. Like, I feel like Ashby is more humble and willing to accept mistakes and willing to try and fix them instead of being pig-headed about it compared to Altman.
and views themselves as less of an extremely experimental artist probably than Altman, who is always willing to just say, well, that's one of the 15 movies I'm going to make this decade. That one had weird sound for a part.
While we're on the topic of Warren Beatty, I think we'd be remiss to not include a clip of his famous monologue. If you haven't seen this film, or you forget, or if you just kind of want just a little dose of Warren Beatty's sensibilities, perhaps a thesis of the film, can we just drop that famous monologue in the episode right now?
It'll help me if you tell me.
How?
Because I'll know that you've lied to me all along, and I'll know that you're incapable of love, and that'll help me.
I just, I have... You really want to know?
Yes.
There were a couple of... there were... Jesus, there were... This... Let's face it, I fucked them all. That's what I do. That's why I went to beauty school. They're always there, and I can't... I don't know what I'm apologizing for, so sometimes I fuck them. I go into that shop, and they're so great looking, and I'm doing their hair, and they feel great, and they smell great. Or I could be out on the street, and I could just stop at a stoplight or go into an elevator, or there's a beautiful girl. I don't know. That's it. It makes my day. It makes me feel like I'm going to live forever. And as far as I'm concerned, with what I'd like to have done at this point in my life, I know I should have accomplished more, but I got no regrets. Jesus, because maybe that means I don't love him. Maybe it means I don't love you. I don't know. Nobody's going to tell me I don't like him very much.
It's a wonderful monologue. It's the first moment in the movie where George comes into focus. Another interesting structural aspect to this, and not just in the screenplay, but also the direction, is that George is, he's so passive and he's so barely present in a lot of these scenes where he's very distracted. And most of what happens in the scene has to do with a woman talking about something that's going on, and he's kind of listening to it. He doesn't say that much. He seems very wishy-washy. But this is the first moment, and it's late in the film, and he gets another one shortly after this, where you finally really see what he's about, and he explains himself, and he sounds comically buffoonish, but at the same point, everything that he says makes total sense. And I don't know, there's something about movies that are like this. I'm trying to think of another example, ones where you don't see who the character is until they have a moment, and it's often towards the end, and that just retroactively changes. Now that person is that character. Maybe it also adds to rewatch value because now you sort of know this going in and you can watch the character's earlier actions. They seem less occluded. I feel like I have an example, another thing like this that's on the tip of my tongue. Do you have anything?
I don't have an example. I guess in along those lines of surprise, when George has that monologue, I am not surprised by his personality. It fits with everything you've seen. I think what I'm surprised about is the level of introspection and him being comfortable with how he approaches life and what he does, and that rather than him saying, yeah, I'm a bad guy, but that's okay, him saying, I'm not a bad guy. I do these things. It's not bad. It's how I am. And I'm just, you know what? I'm going to stand up and say that. Yeah, that's who I am.
You can tell me that this means that I don't really love these women, but I spend literally every fucking second of my day thinking about them, so I feel like I like them. It's you can tell me that you know what's in my heart and what I really want. From my perspective, it feels like this is my life. It feels like they are my world.
When there's that confrontation between George and Lester, when you think Lester's going to beat him up after he discovers that George has been sleeping with his mistress.
And his wife and his daughter, although maybe he doesn't know about the wife and the daughter, actually.
Lester asks, why do all the women like you, or something like that, and George basically gives him the advice of just listen to them. Just listen to the talk. And then he says that something a little sexist where he's all they want to talk about is, men. And so that's
all they want to talk about is what is men doing something wrong to them. which is sexist in a way, in a sort of 90s stand-up comedian way, but like you could argue that he's saying like women have a lot of problems with men and maybe we should listen to them.
It's true. It's like the least Bechtel-y testy thing ever, saying that they literally don't have conversations that don't involve men. And I'm sure that's the case in the movie. Like, I bet this movie would not pass the Bechdel test, where if there's two females talking to each other, they're probably talking about a man. But on the flip side, it's, as you mentioned, also bringing up the fact that he's pointing out that men treat women like shit at that time.
Yeah. I mean, so this movie is not a feminist picture, but I would say that it is arguing towards a more feminized, sensitive kind of man being a valid version of masculinity, I guess. You know, I mean, this whole character is a deconstruction of, you know, an archetype of a gay hairdresser where everybody's assuming that he's gay, but he's actually the fox in the hen house, and he's dressing, you know, kind of frou-frou-ly, but he's riding around on a motorcycle like a greaser or something.
I do think it is really important that he says, you know, one of the reasons he went to beauty school was he noticed that's where all the chicks were. But it's not that he's pretending to like doing hair in order to sleep with the women. I think it is really important that he loves his job as a hairdresser. He's really good at engaging with female beauty standards and making them look beautiful. Like, he is invested in that. He cares about that. He's passionate about that. He often seems to want to do their hair just as much, if not more, than he wants to fuck them. Yeah, I do think that's a really interesting way of deconstructing masculinity, because obviously being a stylist is not considered a traditionally masculine heterosexual role for men.
Yeah, and also he's like fucking crying a bunch in this movie. There's a weird amount for a 70s movie or a movie from now of him crying and that affecting the other characters as it would in real life. The movie ends with him crying, but then there's just a scene in the middle where he's in a fight with Goldie Hawn, and he breaks down about feeling like he's going nowhere in his life, and she is so clearly moved by this showing of emotion, as most people are when they see a man cry in any context.
I love seeing men cry. Not because I'm a bitch who just likes to see men like go through a hard time. Maybe there's part of that there. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm capable of that level of self-criticism to know whether that's an aspect or not. But I cry all the fucking time. I hate that I cry so much. I wish I didn't cry so much. So when a man cries, it's like, yeah, I wish everybody would cry more so that it would be less annoying when I do it. But also, I just think like crying, it should be okay. It's just an expression of emotion, and I love when a man cries because I love knowing that man feels comfortable doing that if it is a choice, because obviously sometimes you can't help if you cry or not. In my case, I can never help if I cry. But yeah, I just wish more men could feel comfortable crying, because y'all experience sadness too.
So, and by the way, I just have to say that like it's very annoying to have these conversations about genders as a non-binary person sometimes. I don't know how much I identify with like men's problems versus women's problems, but I will say just conversely, I do think sometimes there's this thing where crying triggers people to understand, oh, I should suddenly be feeling empathetic to this person because they're feeling so emotional that they have to cry. But there's plenty of times when I'm not crying, and I would certainly love it if somebody was being a little bit more empathetic to my emotional state instead of just getting angry at me until they understand that it comes from like sadness instead of agitation. Do you know what I mean?
Sometimes it can feel frustrating to not have crying as a tool to indicate the degree of upsetness that you're feeling. I try to always communicate that when I'm crying, it's not that I think my emotion is more important than the person who isn't crying. I truly can't help it. I know that I just have a different threshold level. But we're going so much into the deep end.
Sort of, but crying is about this movie is about this. I mean, so come on. The last shot of the movie is him crying.
It's just funny because I actually don't remember him crying at all in this film.
He literally is going like, oh baby. It's hilariously weak-seeming crying from Beatty. I mean, you could argue he's almost not quite all the way there, or maybe he's overplaying it a little bit, but I kind of like it because it's like that kind of person who's like really indulging in sadness. They're like, oh. You don't remember this?
Yeah, maybe to me, I clocked it as like whining because it felt like so over the top rather than like an expression of sadness.
You saw the ending as him like whining, like it's like, ha George, you can't get everything.
Yeah, a little bit.
Interesting. I totally read it completely different. Like, I really feel like I feel like there's a real aura of sadness and a wistfulness in this movie that is meant to be its heart.
I think what I'm bringing to this is the baggage of what I said earlier, where I feel like the reason he cares so much about Jackie in that moment is because he feels like it's something he can't have. So it does, to me, feel a little bit immature how upset he is, because I don't feel like he is experiencing quite as much love as he claims to in that moment. But there are other moments where I feel very emotionally touched by his experience. And in particular, what I'm thinking of is when he's talking about his relationship with Jill, the woman he's currently like in an actual relationship with, he basically insinuates at one point that one of the reasons he cheats on her is because he knows that she's going to leave him at some point soon, because he doesn't have the financial stability to support her in the ways that she likes, and that this is a thing that happens to him a lot. Women like sleeping with him, but they don't actually like staying with him because he doesn't have all those other aspects that women are looking for in a relationship. And I felt that emotion deeply when he shared that, of like him almost leaning into this womanizer personality because he feels like he's cutting his losses and doesn't want his heart broken.
One of the coolest things about this movie is, I don't know if I said this, but Jack Warden is presented as a viable romantic rival to Warren Beatty, who is presented as the hottest guy in the world to all women. And yet, Jack Warden is this balding, overweight guy who got like a pug face, and he's rich and he's a little bit uncaring, but he's mostly presented as actually sort of sensitive and sweet in his way. He is seen as a phony by those people around him. But by the end of the movie, you're just like, yeah, man, join the party. You seem like a fun guy. I don't know. It's not like Lester is presented as the good guy and Beatty is presented as the heel, but George is not entirely sympathetic. It's possible that we could go too far in lionizing Beatty's character. Pauline Kael called him a sexual saint and all that. But, I guess one thing for like how's this movie aged is like, so he sleeps with Carrie Fisher. This is Carrie Fisher's film debut. She's 17. The actor is 17. It's not clear how old the character's supposed to be, but let's not assume she's supposed to be anywhere older than 19, I think, at the oldest, maybe younger.
I actually didn't find myself too skeeved out by that part, because I do feel like it's very unclear how old she is, and she doesn't seem at all like this like really innocent teenager. Like I got the sense that she was like an adult daughter, a young adult, but an adult daughter who still lives with her mother because the family's rich. Alarm bells weren't really going off in my head about that part as they normally would in a big age gap situation.
Like it's definitely not presented as he's taking advantage of her, and in fact, it doesn't even cause tension between him and her mother.
Disagree about saying it doesn't cause tension between.
They don't have a conversation about it.
Just because they don't have a conversation about it doesn't mean there's not tension there.
Maybe there's tension, but my point is, it's not. She doesn't ask him like, did something happen? And he says like, what? Or like they don't even address it,
So Lee Grant, who plays Felicia. So we're talking about the scene where George just slept with Felicia's daughter while he's waiting around for Felicia to come home. And she comes home and he's coming out of the daughter's bathroom. He's zipping his pants up and Felicia's just standing there. It's very unclear if she knows whether or not George just slept with her daughter, and she just stands there and stares at him and then says something like, come with me, and then she takes him into his room and fucks him. I think that scene is the reason why Lee Grant won Best Supporting Actress for this movie. And that scene has an interesting backstory. It was one of the first scenes, I believe, that Lee Grant filmed in the movie. And that scene almost made her quit the production because of disagreements with Warren Beatty. Grant shows up on set and Warren Beatty says, okay, here's how you're playing this scene. This is what your character is thinking. And Lee Grant is like, first of all, fuck you. You're not my director. Like, Hal Ashby's my director. And she knows that Ashby is a type of director who would say, surprise me and would let her decide how her character would act. So she first of all didn't like that Warren Beatty was giving her direction when he wasn't the director. She didn't like that the type of direction was so explicitly telling her how to do her job as an actress. And she disagreed with his reading about how she should play the scene. So Warren Beatty thought that she should play the scene in such a way that basically going along with the idea that women don't see what they don't want to see. They're not even open to possibilities if it doesn't align with what they want from the world. Like, she doesn't notice that he just slept with her daughter because she just doesn't want that to be the reality. And Lee Grant thought that wasn't realistic. The more realistic way a woman would handle the situation is that Felicia knows that George is a womanizer and knows that this type of thing comes with the territory of being involved with a guy like George. And if she wants to be able to sleep with the hot young George, she has to be okay with the fact that he's going to fuck her daughter behind her back. And that's something that she's willing to accept because she's kind of desperate and lonely.
Yeah, and Beatty's almost 40, by the way, at this point. He's not that young. But anyways, I also think, I think that, sure, that's a fine scene for Lee Grant, but frankly, I think that her Oscar win was a career win because she'd been blacklisted. It's the terrible story of she gave an impassioned eulogy at the memorial service for Edward Bromberg, who is some actor who was called in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee, and I guess he killed himself or he died young or something, and she gave this eulogy that was like, I kind of think that it was probably partially due to the fact that he was persecuted for being a leftist by this horrible McCarthyism and stuff, and then she immediately found herself on a list. And so, yeah, I mean, she's literally, it's like you getting blacklisted from giving the eulogy at the funeral of somebody else who was blacklisted. That's just fucking low, people. I mean, I guess if you're looking to blacklist somebody, you're probably trolling all of the big funerals and looking for anybody making spicy comments.
Lee Grant is somebody who had early success. She was nominated for Best Supporting Actress in 1951 in the film Detective Story. And so, yeah, she had this early success, but then became blacklisted, and it lasted for 12 years. And right at the peak of her career, where she's like the ideal age for a female actress at the time, and 12 years of being blacklisted is just pretty devastating for a young actress's life. And I know that it caused quite a lot of bitterness, and it's just such a devastating thing to think about. And then she finally made her comeback, but at that point, she's already now reaching like middle age, and obviously she struggled with that.
I think Lee Grant's win, it was one of those like career wins for this actor's courageousness. And also late 60s, early 70s, the blacklist is over, people. That shit's in the past. We're giving people Oscars now who were famous people that were blacklisted, not just writers under a pseudonym.
I agree that I wasn't blown away by Lee Grant's acting enough to warrant an Oscar, and you're probably right that it's kind of like a career nod. The other actresses didn't blow me away. I actually really enjoyed Goldie Hawn in this movie. I thought she really popped. Julie Christie I thought was fine, but it seems like people loved her performance in this. I think she was just really big at that time. Pauline Kael, in her review, calls Julie Christie the sexiest woman in movies right now. And she says, in this role, she's a gorgeous, hoary-lipped little beast, a dirty sprite, which is, of course, a crazy thing to say. That's a very Pauline Kael quote.
Like, if there's something beastly going on with Julie Christie's mouth in this movie. She's very wolfish. And she's like a jerk, too.
Yeah, I just wasn't actually that compelled with her character. Like, I didn't form clear thoughts about her character, and I feel like part of it was that the performance didn't really hit for me that much. I didn't think she was bad, but it just didn't really crystallize into anything very clear for me personally. I just kept thinking, like, she's hot and British, and that's it.
The audience's knowledge of their previous relationship is meant to be doing a lot of heavy lifting for thinking they have this extra special cosmic connection, Beatty and Christie.
Yeah, the fact that they had an intermittent romantic relationship that lasted from 1967 to 1974, and they already had starred opposite each other in McCabe and Mrs. Miller in 1971. And then also, I think not only are they capitalizing on her and Warren Beatty's relationships, but from what I understand, she just had the persona of being this swinging 60s woman. If they're making a period piece about the 60s, I think she was kind of an ideal actress to to cast in this.
Yeah, and Goldie Hawn is literally like the persona of a hippie chick as seen on Laugh-In, which we will no doubt post a picture of this. But yeah, let's get a little bit more into the 60s counterculture party aspects of this movie, because that's a big chunk of it. There's something about, it's kind of like the centerpiece of the movie are these elaborately staged parties. One of which is like a Republican Chamber of Commerce-y kind of looking thing. And the other is like this cartoon, the greatest party of all time. They're playing Mr. Soul on the record player, and then the entirety of Sgt. Pepper's, and there's a hot tub orgy, there's pot everywhere. Jack Warden gets to light a candle and look at himself in the mirror. Like, it's just the ultimate movie party. And, there's something returned to the Garden of Eden, I think, in a lot of the interactions that Christie and Beatty have in that scene. They're very, very lovely. Like, they, his little declaration of love for her, and then their silhouettes come together to kiss right when Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds comes on, which, like, that's not a song that I ever thought of as like a romantic, sweet song. But of course, Hal Ashby is one of cinema's greatest, most romantic directors. And he, even if characters aren't supposed to end up together, or even if they're a weird match, he really knows how to make a moment in a movie how to make you feel that. And it takes you right back to that feeling of like being a teenager and having your first kiss or something. I mean, like, you wouldn't think that like a famous song off of the most famous Beatles album played at a moment of a kiss would be sweet in the same way that the songs on the Garden State soundtrack are. But Ashby has that way of, he just really does feel the late 60s in a way that it doesn't just feel like cheap needle drops. I mean, part of it is supposed to be like period setting, but part of it is just like Ashby just feels the shit. He's like listening to Sgt. Pepper's and just being like, that's beautiful, man.
I do really like the party scenes, like the political uptight party compared to the 60s party. They're very fun, especially the 60s party scene. And it really highlights the dynamics between the characters, where a lot of the characters are trying to move up in the world. George is trying to own his own salon, but he doesn't want to compromise his morals at the same time. Jackie clearly doesn't care about compromising her morals. Like, she is the mistress of Lester, the older rich businessman, so she is trying to move up in the world and has given up her morals in that regard. And then Jill is deciding whether or not she wants to play the social ladder climbing game. She is with George, but then is contemplating starting a relationship with this famous film director who is more financially stable but clearly more boring
and more controlling, and he's kind of a beta male in a way. Like, there's this interesting contrast that comes up towards the end where he's almost turned off by how unrefined George is, but he also wants to be able to walk between the worlds of the Republican Party and the 60s counterculture party. It's just he's like kind of a snob and controlling and insecure, and like this is this version of masculinity that it's like he wants to. This is the director guy. He wants to. I wish I remembered his fucking name, but I don't. He wants to like present as if he's like more understanding than the uncaring George. But this is this total critique of like a fake nice guy.
But in my opinion, the most interesting character to observe during the 60s party scene is Lester, the businessman, played by Jack Warden. So Jack Warden was nominated for an Oscar for this performance, and I think it's really well-deserved. I really like him in this movie a lot. I did find my eye drawn to Lester every time he was on the screen. So I found his performance pretty magnetic in this movie. He is so weirdly appealing despite being the rich Republican businessman, and I think that's so impressive. I just love the scene at the party where Lester, you've already brought this up briefly, but Lester is walking by a hot tub and there's two hot chicks in the hot tub and they're basically inviting him to come in and have a threesome. And he, is about to take them up on the offer. And you as the audience are weirdly like rooting for him. Like, you want him to be able to have this experience. And I think part of that is you're seeing all these other characters in the movie who are stressed and they are trying to climb the social ladder and use people to get what they think they need out of life. But then you have Lester, who already has everything that you'd think a person would want. Like, he's got the money, he's got a family, he's got the business success, and his primary goal seems to be to just enjoy life. It's this weird mind game, I think, that the movie does, where it's more enjoyable to watch a character savor life than it is to watch a character try to achieve financial success. You're weirdly enjoying the experience more of watching the rich businessmen interact with the world around him compared to the rest of them. He is at the party just wanting to find as much pleasure as he can from life, and it's strangely very charming.
Yeah, because George is not, that is not really a concern of George's. You almost get the impression that Jack Warden is a little bit more interested in, like, the counterculture than George is, because George is just sort of like he's a Beverly Hills celebrity hairdresser, or, the rich people hairdresser. He's not exactly a hippie living in a van, But Lester seems like he's at a place, like, as you say, he's achieved enough in life and he has enough security that he seems to really want to explore what there is out there for George. And so as I was talking about, like, George has a kind of enlightenment at the end, but it's a very impotent enlightenment because he doesn't have any power to accomplish anything. You'd be tempted to say that the converse is true, too, of Lester, that Lester is setting out on this journey trying to get what he really wants with his mistress, and maybe you can guess that that's not going to work out perfectly and he's not going to find the meaning of life that way. Probably this would have had a much finer point put on it if they did do the epilogues, and I really kind of prefer it the way that they have it here, where you're just left where characters, they have a certain kind, George especially, has a certain kind of self-knowledge, but it's like, what use are you possibly going to put this to? This is where the whole late 60s /politics metaphor comes into play, because there really, I think, was a real sense of, like, a lot of liberals or a lot of anti-America type hippies or people in the late 60s where they really saw through all the bullshit, but they didn't really mean that they could change anything or make any real difference in the world, no matter how much they see that the social contract is broken. Whereas Lester has a little bit more ability to play around in the system that has worked for him so far. So, it's an indictment of the counterculture and liberals in some ways more than Republicans.
I think you brought up in your intro the phrase, the personal is political, and how this movie is kind of attacking that phrase.
It could be, you could consider that as sort of an offensive invocation in this particular context, but I mean it in a sense that maybe the actual phrase is not traditionally employed.
Right, because, like, what is the history of that phrase? I'm not that familiar with it.
Well, it's a feminism phrase about women's issues, which, like, there's a scene on Mad Men when Peggy, and this is in the mid-60s, and Peggy has this boyfriend who's like a real hipster leftist, and he's so obsessed with civil rights. He's got this impassioned fervor for how important it is to make sure that all citizens are equal. And Peggy has this line that she's like, yeah, that's very important, but, I have to say, I feel like a lot of the stuff that black people aren't allowed to do, she doesn't say it like this, she's, a period character, but she says, I feel like a lot of things that black people can't do, I also can't do as a woman. And, like, she goes on about this, and the guy's just completely flabbergasted that she would equate, like, her life as a white, upwardly mobile woman to the struggles of, an actually politically disenfranchised group, So I do think that there was a lot of people saw women's issues as, that's a personal issue. That's the kind of thing that, people just got to deal with in the privacy of their own homes. It's not political. This is my understanding. I might be totally wrong about it, but I'm pretty sure, like, the personal political is meant to evoke, it's meant to say, like, no, this is a political issue. It is not just men are from Mars and women are from Venus kind of thing. I think it does have broader implications. This is kind of the same thing as saying all politics is local, right? It's sort of everything is interconnected, and your life, you might think that you're outside of politics, but you're not. And I think this movie is about that. These people are not viewing themselves as the product of a political system, but they are. And ignoring politics, some people, especially nowadays, would argue makes them complicit, I guess.
Obviously, it's clear that their personal life is interfering with their ability to engage with what's going on around them politically, but these characters are all very privileged, so I'm curious as to what you think how you think their personal struggles could be improved upon with different political changes. And I'm not saying that I don't think that I think everybody's lives can be improved upon with different politics, but I'm just curious, like, if you could have a more solidified explanation for how politics could affect what they're currently going through.
I think they exist more as a metaphor for the direction that the 60s counterculture, quote unquote, took. And this is a horse that I flog a lot on this show. I think that it's the concept of the death of the 60s, right? There's a lot of people who like critique hippies in sort of the way that this movie is pointing to. It's, we blew it, right? There is this idea that people have now that the counterculture in the 60s started out as student protests and civil rights protests and real political engagement, 60s radicalism, the Weather Underground. And then, as the decade went on, it just sort of devolved into a bunch of hippies saying, hey, man, you should fucking think about a flower instead of a bomb. Just sounding stupid and just saying, like, all we need to do is love each other. Like, all of the world leaders should just give each other a hug, man, and then that'll fix everything, right? Personally, I think that a lot of the way of the people have come to look at this throws a lot of the baby out with the bathwater and at the same time kind of conflates hippies with 60s radicalism, which I actually think they're two different and equally important things. But that would be the critique. I think that the movie is supposed to show by this point in the 60s, we think of the 60s as this time of dramatic change, but the change became a lot more personal fulfillment focused and moved away from a sense of we shall overcome and the revolution's coming. It's not like I think these characters are ever going to be great politicians or anything. I think they're meant to be kind of a metaphor.
That makes sense. This film, Shampoo, sort of received a mix of critical reviews. Some critics really liked it, others not so much. I've mentioned a number of quotes from the Pauline Kael review. Hers was really quite glowing, and she describes it in such high terms as saying it's the most virtuoso example of sophisticated kaleidoscopic farce that American movie makers have ever come up with. She calls the script Mozartian at one point. So that's like...
How many great farces in America are there?
No, it's true. But she certainly is like really laying it on thick how much she loves this movie. I was very tickled to see in Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, the book by Peter Biskind, that he suggests Pauline Kael was wined and dined by Robert Towne, and that her review was reflective of stuff that he like fed to her. Like people... She had mentioned a connection between Smiles of the Summer Night and Shampoo, and people have said she only brought that up because Robert Towne wanted her to bring that up in the review.
I guess you think everybody's stretching if they evoke Smiles of a Summer Night and Shampoo. For me, it makes total sense.
No. I clearly see a connection between Smiles of a Summer Night and Shampoo. They're clearly connected. And Pauline Kael is a lover of European film, so it's not at all weird that she would be drawing that connection.
This movie, Shampoo, is a takeoff on, a partner swap comedy of manners like The Rules of the Game or Bergman's Smiles of a Summer Night. The things that mark these kinds of stories are like a bunch of characters being consumed by their personal lives and often thinking they should be with one person, but really they should be with another person. It is often set against the backdrop of some sort of political event or historical thing, or it's like you're saying something about these people, and it's usually kind of that they're aristocratic twits. Rules of the Game is a very similar kind of thing. Upper class people at a mansion, partner swapping, and totally neglecting to notice that World War II is about to start, and they're in France.
They're clearly connected. And so I just thought that we should make sure to bring that up because we are called Kael Your Idols. Like every episode, I try to pull in things that Kael has said in her reviews about the movies that we watch because I find her a very interesting critic to think about. I think it is important to every now and then throw in some Pauline Kael criticisms when they arise that she has been known to pick her favorites, play sides a little bit, and this seems like one of those. I don't know how much we can rely on some of the interviews Robert Towne gave in Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, but it seems like this might have been one of those examples where Kael was not quite objective in her review. But I think Shampoo's great, so I don't think it's a problem that the review was super glowing. Like it's a great film.
But I'm sorry, but like all of the movies that they always say Kael put her thumb on or that she was wined and dined about are like total masterpieces, like fucking Nashville and stuff like that, and Shampoo. So it's like if they needed to get her opinion and they needed to really tell her what the movie was about, in my opinion, it's not like she's elevating some bullshit or whatever. Mostly I like the positive reviews that she has of movies where people called into question whether or not she was sort of influenced.
Yeah. Like, she's really good about writing a review where she'll praise the things that are great about it and criticize the things that she thinks are a little weak. And so maybe for her, wined and dined means that if she does truly like a film, she'll go a little less on pointing out the weaknesses. And, that's okay. That's so, like, mild in terms of somebody's compromising their work.
This actually brings up an interesting question. Like, I mean, I know that you don't like to read criticism before you see a film. Typically. I do sometimes, and there's all sorts of times when I've read something. I remember Jon Stewart's Rosewater. I read a piece of criticism that I was like, oh, I now understand why Jon Stewart has directed this movie, and I am very excited to see it. And it really contextualized the movie in a way that made me enjoy it a lot more. So it's like, do we feel like critics shouldn't need that? If Pauline Kael benefits in her viewing of Shampoo by having Smiles of a Summer Night put in her head by Robert Towne, does that mean that her opinion becomes false because she didn't think of that out of her own encyclopedic knowledge of film? I'm actually just thinking about this right now.
No, I don't think that's a problem at all. I think if somebody says, like, oh, can you keep in mind this when you're watching the film? Like, I love when I go see a film screening and somebody gives an introduction to the film beforehand where they provide context and it allows me to pay attention to certain things. Or if, just doing this podcast, like, I am approaching all of these movies in a different light than I normally would because I'm watching them particularly through the lens of the time period it was made in. I do think all of that is really valuable. I think it's more just that, like, as I said, she tends to give more balanced reviews where she criticizes things as well as praises them. And this one was a little striking in just how much it was nonstop praise of the film.
I can't say that I know why, she gave this film particularly unqualified praise, but it's a really unusual movie. And like it's just, I don't know of another, like, I could see Pauline Kael seeing this and being like, I have not seen anything like this in an American context, because I don't think I have either.
But despite the fact that it received mixed critical reviews, it still went on to have 4 Oscar nominations. We've mentioned before supporting actor, supporting actress, which Lee Grant won for, best original screenplay, and then also best art direction. And it was the 3rd highest grossing film of 1975. Clearly, like, it still did really well financially. I am still, again, shocked that it only has a 68% Rotten Tomatoes score now. I do encourage you all to watch this movie because I find it really fun.
How do you think this fits into the new Hollywood context, like as a new Hollywood film? I guess then an additional question that arises in me is, like, do you feel that this movie now to some people might seem very different from other new Hollywood movies and thus have less teeth for people than something?
I definitely think it does have a little less teeth. It is more palatable. I think of this film as delightful, and I think I said that once, and you kind of gave me a strange look, and I think because you're thinking a lot more about the political satire aspects of the film than I am, so I think you're a little less likely to describe it as delightful, whereas I'm primarily remembering just the sex farce of it all. It does seem, despite the fact that it's clearly criticizing politics of the time, it doesn't go, in my opinion, deep enough in the criticisms to feel unsettling in any sort of way. It's like, it kind of has more of the tone of like, y'all fucked up. Although, there is some of that doom that's evoked with the taste of death at the end, but it doesn't capitalize on that death. Like, you're a little worried about George and Jackie driving through the roads, but they end up not getting into a car accident. And although it ends with George crying at the top of the mountain, it's not one of those super sad, unsettling new Hollywood endings that you might find in other films, such as like Apocalypse Now.
I watched it with my other partner, and they really got bummed out at the end of the movie, and maybe they were also looking at it in more of a political context, but I do think that it's interesting kind of how the bummer aspects of this movie just sort of go past you, and like you, as you said, you describe it as delightful. And it's not like I'm seeing an incisive political critique. It's just this movie has a real aura of melancholy to it. And the ending to me is 100% classic New Hollywood, but it's the emotional version of New Hollywood, where it's like a man crying. And like the mere fact of ending on a man crying, which is, it also just feels like an unresolved moment. Like it almost feels comical. But at the same time, it's a striking ending to me. I don't know if unsettling is the right word, but the ending to me is one of the most New Hollywood aspects.
I will say that the first half of the film is way more fun to watch than the second half. So when I think of it as delightful, I guess I am focusing a little bit on the first half of the film. And then the second half feels just kind of like, okay, we set up all this plot. Now let's see everything unravel and see what's going to happen now, which there's just so many movies like that where it feels like the third act, you're just kind of waiting for the action to finish playing out. Not that I think that the second half of the film is boring or anything.
It's the best part.
But I don't think it's the best part, in my opinion.
That's where you get all the monologues, the parties, and stuff. I feel like all of the best stuff is in the second half of the movie.
I think because the delightful aspects of it are what really stuck with me, I'm more drawn to the first half of it. And I just weird. That's a weird position for me because, again, like, I really am not usually drawn to movies that just make me feel good. Like, I usually am drawn more towards, like, deeply emotional, dramatic, dark stuff. Maybe it's just that the second half of the film doesn't go deep enough into all of that for it to hit for me.
The movie starts out as a farce and ends up being sort of a Shaggy Dog hangout film in a way, which, again, is another structural aspect that I think is really cool about the film. It stops being propulsive and it just starts being about people having real conversations with each other. But yeah, do you want to talk about other New Hollywood aspects of this?
Sure, yeah. We've talked about the ending, whether or not it's dark enough to be considered like a classic New Hollywood ending, but some things you've already brought up. It's exploring a new type of male character that isn't traditionally seen. Kind
of an anti-hero?
Yeah, like it's a new type of male lead, despite the fact that it's played by a clear movie star type dude, Warren Beatty, but yeah, anti-hero, as you mentioned, like heterosexual male hairdresser, it just really upends classic ideas of masculinity. And then the movie explores sexuality in a very frank way that feels very New Hollywood to me. And I think anything that Ashby ever touches is just gonna be infused with a gentle New Hollywood flavor.
The casting also is just, it's all very, like, Jack Warden is himself a kind of, he's a character actor, but he's a New Hollywood leading man in a way. This is, and will go down as probably the signature Jack Warden performance. And who Jack Warden usually plays, and I've said this before on the podcast, is a kind of boss who's loosening his tie and who you feel like maybe I could actually be friends with or connect with. Like, he's an authority figure, but he has a certain friendliness to him. And I actually think this is something that is not an archetype that you would see before New Hollywood. Really, maybe I'm being a little too broad, but it's like this I don't know, loosening of the borders between generations is kind of exemplified by Jack Warden, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And then there's something about the legacy of this film that can also take us on a quick little tangent towards another aspect of film going on at the time, and that's blaxploitation film, because this movie was so successful, it spawned a follow-up movie
with just an incredibly creative title.
A movie called Black Shampoo. And this movie was made in 1976, so it's, quick on the heels of Shampoo. The director, Graydon Clark, said his reason for making Black Shampoo was that Clark did not want to have to make another film about a pimp or private detective or drug dealer who are often the protagonists of blaxploitation films. So he liked the idea of being able to represent a new type of male character in a blaxploitation film. Although despite that, obviously, if you watch the movie Black Shampoo, it's obvious that he still was under quite a lot of pressure to fulfill all the typical tropes of a blaxploitation movie.
Yeah, it's like an action movie where there's like white crime lords that he's got to kill and stuff. Like, one of the things this movie illuminates about Shampoo is just the eternal lesson of how beneficial it is for your movie to have a character, the main character, have a profession that is not typically seen of most protagonists. Like, if they're not a cop, if they're not a doctor, if they're not a military person, or, an actor even, or just like these really cliched things, you've automatically got a leg up on other movies, because watching a person be a barber is already a more interesting thing to watch somebody be than most of the other stuff that you've seen. However, the movie Black Shampoo puts the lie to this idea that all you need is a good milieu and an interesting profession, because Black Shampoo is boring as fuck. And yeah, like it's him being a hairdresser and being in this unusual circumstance for a black lead in the 70s does not a movie make.
Yeah, the fact that it's called Black Shampoo makes you think that it's trying to evoke the feeling of the original.
Which would be so cool.
Yeah, it would have been so cool if there could be a blaxploitation version of Shampoo that somehow captures the original tone, but it doesn't do that at all. Comparing Black Shampoo to Shampoo is like comparing Annie Hall to Mean Streets. Like, yeah, they're both set in New York, but they are wildly different. Like, yes, Black Shampoo and Shampoo are both about womanizing hairdressers. That's where any similarities stop. Black Shampoo, unfortunately, the technical quality is just so horrendous, and it is boring, and it also is just straight up pornography. There's this hilarious part where it's clearly riffing on when George from Shampoo sleeps with Felicia's daughter, and in Black Shampoo, their version of that is that, like, the main character comes up and he's going to a client's house, and her 2 teenage daughters are in the pool, and they suddenly take their swimsuit off and start trying to have a threesome with him. So he's getting accosted by 2 daughters instead of just 1. Clearly that's like even more fun than Shampoo because there's 2 chicks that are trying to sleep with him.
Yeah, and it's almost like a parody, too, because he's doing the same sort of almost ineffectual quality that George has in the real Shampoo, but it's taken to a parodic extreme where, like, the girls are getting naked and they're like, oh, come over here, I'll show you a good time. And he's just like, oh, come on, girls, I'm just here to cut hair. And it's just actually like what the affect that most male porn stars affect in porn, where they're just like very like, oh, hello, I'm going to have sex with you right now. And it's, I don't know, it almost makes the movie comedy, but then it kind of devolves into boringness, which is why, as far as blaxploitation takeoffs on popular films goes, a missed opportunity. Although it does have a really great opening sequence of him shampooing their hair and washing their hair. And it's like, that is kind of a sexual thing when you, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be creepy to any future hairstylists of me, but yeah, whenever you wash my hair at the stylist, I'm getting a little bit turned on. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly, something that's been remarked upon in culture before. Like, there's that famous Friends episode where 2 of the female characters, I'm not that familiar with Friends, so that's why I'm just saying 2 of the female characters instead of saying their names, but they're, comparing whether or not they essentially orgasm from this one guy who washes their hair.
Yeah, like Pantene Pro V commercial or Herbal Essence, is that for, from the 90s or whatever?
Yeah, so I think many people do acknowledge it is a very sensual experience getting your hair washed. I personally, when I go to get my hair cut, I don't like being talked to by the hairdresser. I'm not like rude about it or whatever, but I hate making small talk. So my favorite experience is like really quick, in and out. I'm not sitting there having a sensual experience. I'm just like, this is nice, getting my hair washed, and then let's get this cut over with as soon as possible. But I'm glad for you, Sam, that you're able to get a little more joy out of your
It's not like I'm going in attempting to have a sexual thing. It's just like I kind of can't help but get sort of turned on when somebody's washing my hair. It's just a very intimate thing. It ain't like going to the dentist or I don't know. I don't love to be made to talk during a haircut. I much less mind like a hairstylist monologuing at me about their life, but I don't want them to ask me a bunch of questions and like us have to develop a relationship over the course of a haircut. I'm just like, you're making me move my head in weird directions. That's not conducive to a good conversation. Okay, so do you think this is about time to flop Shampoo down on the cold stone, mix it up, and see how we rate it?
Let's do it.
So for those of you who don't know, Cold Stone Creamery is an ice cream establishment that has done away with the old forms of classical ideas of sizes like small, medium, and large. For them, the only way to describe the size of an ice cream is to describe it in terms such as like it, love it, and gotta have it.
I like that you make it sound as if they're like, have such strong convictions about the way sizing should be. They've done away with the old boring way of sizing and they just have no other option but follow their hearts and stick with like it, love it, gotta have it. Like, you make it sound like they're such like radical thinkers that have to follow their gut.
Well, I mean, like they are. Like, I mean, I don't know of any other business that has completely rethought something as foundational as the size of the product. Like, I mean, imagine if you went to a store and like they were like, no, we don't call this a cup, we call it a splurg.
I mean, Starbucks obviously does that with like their venti shit and all that.
Oh yeah, I guess you're right. I guess they're kind of copying it from Starbucks, but they're like, we're a more relatable, we talk like regular folks here. We're not using your fancy foreign sounding words. Although I actually do think Cold Stone might have been founded before Starbucks was a big franchise across the country. If memory serves, I think Starbucks started as a small Seattle company, originally known as Seattle's Best, which is now a different coffee company, in the early 70s, but they didn't gain popularity until the 90s. And Cold Stone, I think, started in 87.
Oh my God. Why? I want to be really clear. We are not affiliated with Cold Stone at all. We just think that their rating system is useful.
I did work there and also at Starbucks, which is why I know this weird corporate lore.
But we are not at all getting money from them. This is not meant to be an advertisement for them. I do like Cold
We do
Stone,
sometimes give money to them, yeah.
I just want to make it clear we're not just pushing an agenda.
I mean, they should pay us. Like, we give them free advertising every single episode.
If we ever get to a place where where we make money on the podcast, I think rather than them paying us, they'd probably might be like, we're gonna sue you. But hopefully that doesn't happen.
I don't know, honey, that would easily be the 100% best thing that could ever happen to this podcast, is if the first time somebody hearing about the existence of this podcast about New Hollywood is finding out that Cold Stone Creamery is suing them. I think that would probably that would interest me. I would maybe check out that podcast. I don't know.
I'm not gonna welcome trouble like that. Anyways, keep going. Explain the rating system.
So if we like a movie, we say we either like it, love it, or gotta have it. If we don't like it, we say that doesn't make the Cold Stone scale, or we say like this is trash. It's a sample spoon and I'm not even finishing all the ice cream on it. So Shampoo, do you like it, love it, or gotta have it, or does it not make the scale for you?
I love it. It's really fun, very interesting. I think it's got a lot of rewatch value. Very cool film to think about in its context of 1975, which is an insane year for film. We'll get into that more at our end of the year episode, but it's a clear love it for me.
But not a gotta have it.
No, not a gotta have it. I love it. It's not one of my favorite films of all time, for sure. But I do recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, it's probably not going to be super high on like a list of favorite films of mine. I would recommend it to anybody, but for me, it's absolutely a gotta have it, as you might have guessed. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that I find a lot of this movie very relatable in a way, as a person who, I have had experiences with people where like I'm dating multiple people at the same time. Maybe they kind of know each other, or they are vague acquaintances, or maybe one of them knows that I'm dating the other one, but the other one didn't know that I'm dating that one, and they're at the same party now and stuff. It's a movie that has a portrayal of this kind of sexual life that is very unusually non-judgmental. And it sounds weird to say, but it's very rare that you see a character like this where you feel like, and obviously a lot of this comes, I am no Warren Beatty. I'm not saying that I'm like some beautiful movie star who is also like a sexual god or something like that. I'm just saying that this movie is a portrait of like why women like this person that doesn't feel like, there's often an assumption that like if somebody gets a lot of women that they're being like predatory, right? This movie, it's like, it's weird. Like, it's good representation of like somebody who is sexually desirable to women because they interest them. Like, it's a very non-misogynistic film, but it's also about tame and strange, and I don't know. So it's an unusual mixture of elements. It's evoking Smiles of a Summer Night and stuff like that. These are the kinds of movies that I wish we had more of now, like these kinds of drawing room dramas or farces or whatever. These are kind of classical forms that I have a taste for that are certainly not associated with New Hollywood, but they're not even associated with movies now. Like this, so to me, it's a real unique taste, and the relatability of that, and also obviously like I love things that are set against the backdrop of something. On some level, it's kind of a cheap device, because it automatically adds importance to the proceedings and you're sort of drawing all these connections. That's also another thing that Black Shampoo is missing. Like, it's not set against the backdrop of anything. My pitch for Black Shampoo is that it should be set against the backdrop of the release of the movie Shampoo. And the characters should all be like rolling their eyes at this, stupid white people movie that's not anything like the real life. Which, by the way, that's another classic Ashby touch that he loves to throw into movies that is present in Shampoo, which is just a cutaway shot of a black person rolling their eyes at white people's nonsense.
Okay, so you are a gotta have it. I am a love it. Overall, we both recommend this film to anybody, I would say. So check it out. That concludes another exciting New Hollywood adventure. Thank you all so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to Kale Your Idols on the podcatcher of your choice. Ratings and reviews are always appreciated. They help us out a lot because we are a small podcast. So please rate and review us if you feel so inclined. We would love to hear from you. Please get in touch with us. We're primarily on Instagram, but you can also find us on X. Just search the name of our podcast, Kale Your Idols. You can also send us an email to kaleyouridols@gmail.com. We want to say thank you to the Illuminator for our logo, and thank you to ourselves for everything else. Similarly to how Shampoo is often considered one of the most New Hollywood films of all time, next episode we'll be discussing a movie that is also arguably one of the most New Hollywood movies of all time, but in a totally different way. And that is Dennis Hopper's art house flop called The Last Movie.
Hey, Peter Fonda. How did we do?
We blew it.
Marlon Brando.